No one knows exactly when she first appeared at the edge of Europe's forests. Perhaps she emerged with the mists of the last ice age, when ancient tribes whispered about a powerful being who ruled the threshold between life and death. According to legend, she lives deep in a moving hut, its walls creaking like old timber, its floor tilting as if on restless feet. Her name carries a chill, Baba Yaga. For centuries, she has hovered in the imagination of Slavic peoples as a witch, a guardian, a monster, and sometimes a helper. Yet beneath the frightening mask lies a far older archetype. One scholar suspects began as a goddess, then slipped into exile as new religions and social orders rose. We begin not with a fairy tale for children, but with a landscape. Picture the endless birch and pine forests of Eastern Europe at dusk. The horizon is a charcoal smear. Smoke from hidden fires curls upward, carrying the smell of resin and damp earth. This is the world of early agrarian tribes, a world of long winters, hungry wolves, and rituals to keep the unseen forces at bay. In that world, a figure like Baba Yaga was not merely a villain from bedtime stories. She was the embodiment of the wilderness itself, of the dangerous freedom outside the village fence. The Slavic languages preserve fragments of her name. Baba, meaning old woman or grandmother. Yaga, related to words for horror, illness, or even snakes. Some folklorists argue the second part once meant bright or burning, hinting at fire rituals and purification. Even in her name we hear echoes of multiple roles, crone and healer, terror and light. Oral traditions, carried by storytellers for hundreds of years before being written down, blended these roles into a single dramatic character. In the oldest stories, she is less a person and more a force of nature. She flies not on a broom but in a mortar, propelling herself with a pestle, sweeping away her traces with a birch broom. This image puzzles modern readers, but for villagers who ground herbs and grains every day, the mortar and pestle symbolize transformation, seeds into flour, plants into medicine. Baba Yaga was a living ritual of change. She could grind down a person's ego or cure their sickness, depending on how they approached her. According to some researchers, the hut on chicken legs, the most famous detail, may have its roots in prehistoric burial customs. Archaeologists have found small raised houses on posts where bodies were left to decompose or where sacred objects were stored. To walk around such a hut, as heroes in fairy tales are instructed to do, was to perform an act of respect to the spirits. In other words, the witch's house may have begun as a shrine, not a lair. Imagine a winter night when children huddle by the fire, listening as a grandmother tells a story. Outside, snow blurs the trees. The tale begins with a hero, maybe a lost soldier, maybe a desperate orphan, who must travel into the dark forest to find a magical object or rescue a sibling. Everyone knows what awaits in the heart of that forest, Baba Yaga. She will test the hero. She may offer impossible tasks or demand payment. But she also keeps treasures, a horse that can cross the sky, a spark of fire, a key to the underworld. Only the worthy leave her hut alive. The rest vanish into the woods forever. This formula, fear plus initiation, is what kept Baba Yaga alive through centuries of retelling. She is not just a frightening old woman. She is the gatekeeper to adulthood. Entering her domain is like stepping into the unknown. In many Slavic cultures, initiation rituals for young people involved symbolic journeys into forests, nights spent alone, or tasks of endurance. The stories echo these rites of passage, turning them into mythic dramas. Scholars also notice how Baba Yaga resembles other boundary figures. The Greek goddess Hecate stands at crossroads with her torches and hounds. The Celtic Cailleach rules storms and winter. In Vedic tradition, there's Kali, both destroyer and mother. Across continents we see similar archetypes, female figures who combine death, wisdom, and the wilderness. This doesn't mean one culture copied another. Rather, it suggests that human beings in harsh environments personified nature's power in comparable ways. Baba Yaga may be Europe's most vivid surviving example of this pattern. Written sources about her begin relatively late. The first printed tales appear in the 18th and 19th centuries, when collectors like Alexander Afanasiev compiled folk stories. By then, the image of Baba Yaga had already been shaped by Christian moral codes. She was cast as a witch in league with dark forces, her earlier goddess aspects blurred or demonized. But careful reading of older variants shows a more ambiguous character. Sometimes she helps the hero willingly. Sometimes she is neutral until provoked. This ambiguity hints at a memory of an older, less moralized deity. Even her appearance reflects this layering. She is described as gaunt, iron-toothed, long-nosed. Yet she also has bones of silver, hair like frost, eyes of flame. These are not merely grotesque details, but symbols. Iron teeth speak of the blacksmith's craft and the ability to transform metal, a divine power in early societies. Frost hair and fire eyes evoke winter and hearth, destruction and warmth. She is a mosaic of opposites. To stand before Baba Yaga in a tale is to stand at the threshold between life stages. The hero must answer questions, complete tasks, or show kindness to animals she controls. If successful, they receive gifts, magical water, a flying steed, a piece of wisdom. If not, they perish. This structure resembles the initiation stories found in many mythologies, where the seeker meets a dangerous teacher, faces trials, and returns transformed. For the audience of such stories, the effect is double. On one level, it warns children not to wander into the forest. On another, it plants the seed of courage, the idea that facing fear yields growth. Baba Yaga thus becomes not only a villain, but a hidden mentor. Her darkness is a test, not a sentence. In this series, we will travel through her myths as if through a deep forest, each glade revealing another layer of her story. We will trace her from prehistoric shrines to modern pop culture, from whispered charms to blockbuster video games. We will see how she shifts shape to fit each era's fears and hopes. And we will ask, why has this figure, older than any written Slavic text, refused to disappear? What does she still offer to a modern world where forests are shrinking but inner wilderness remains? Tonight, as you listen, imagine that you too approach a hut on chicken legs, creaking and turning, waiting for the right words to open its door. Somewhere inside, an old woman stirs a cauldron of memories. She looks up. Her eyes are not only frightening, they are ancient, patient, and perhaps, just perhaps, welcoming. The world that shaped Baba Yaga's legend was not a single kingdom, but a vast belt of forests, rivers, and marshlands stretching from the Baltic to the Ural Mountains. In this environment, life depended on understanding seasons, migration routes, and the moods of nature. Villages were small islands of order, surrounded by a sea of trees. For ancient Slavs and their neighbors, the forest was not only a source of timber and game, but also a place of spirits, ancestors, and hidden powers. To step beyond the clearing was to cross into a realm where the everyday rules no longer applied. Archaeologists and historians reconstruct this world from burial mounds, tools, and remnants of wooden fortifications. Long before Christianity arrived, the region hosted a mosaic of tribes speaking related languages, but practicing diverse rituals. They left offerings at springs, tied cloth to sacred trees, and carved wooden idols with fierce faces. Fire festivals marked the turning of the year. In such a setting, a being like Baba Yaga was not an anomaly, but a natural expression of how people personified the wilderness and its dangers. The oldest versions of the myth appear in oral traditions passed down through women, grandmothers, midwives, and healers, who held the community's knowledge of herbs, childbirth, and stories. These storytellers were often the first to be consulted when someone fell ill or when a child had to be soothed with a tale. They wove warnings and wisdom together, using Baba Yaga both as a threat and a lesson. The repeated images of her hut, her iron teeth, and her uncanny flight created a mental map for listeners, a threshold figure at the edge of the known world. If we follow the river south, we find echoes of similar figures among Finno-Ugric and Baltic peoples. Some had forest grandmothers or lake spirits who tested travelers. Others had wild women who lived outside villages and knew the language of animals. This diffusion of motifs suggests a common set of fears and hopes across the northern Eurasian plain. The details differ. One spirit rides a moose, another lives under a boulder, but the pattern of an older female guardian of the wild recurs. Written records from the medieval period mention Babas as wise women, herbalists, or sometimes suspected witches. But they were also midwives, the ones who guided new life into the world. In many Indo-European cultures, birth and death were considered complementary gateways, and the same rituals could protect a newborn or accompany the dead. Baba Yaga, straddling both roles, may represent that continuity. Her hut on stilts, reminiscent of ancient mortuary houses, could be a symbolic womb and tomb at once. Geography reinforced this symbolism. In winter, villages were cut off by snowdrifts and frozen rivers. In spring, meltwaters flooded lowlands, creating a shifting boundary between settlement and wilderness. To survive, people needed guides who understood herbs, animal tracks, and hidden paths. Such guides, often elderly women, held power and mystery. Over time, as patriarchal structures hardened, these figures were recast as dangerous witches rather than respected mediators. The myth of Baba Yaga preserves this tension. She is feared but also indispensable. Travelers and traders who ventured east or west carried stories with them. As Slavic peoples moved into new territories, they brought Baba Yaga along. She adapted to each dialect and each region's landscape. In some tales she lived near a swamp, in others at the top of a mountain. Sometimes she had sisters, 3 Baba Yagas, ruling different corners of the world. These variations show how myths evolve like living organisms, adjusting to local conditions while keeping a recognizable core. We can also trace her legend through the lens of language. Words related to Yaga appear in old glossaries with meanings like illness, snake, or fire. Each of these is a potent symbol. Illness marks the boundary of health. Snakes shed skin and renew themselves. Fire destroys and purifies. All these themes fit a figure who stands at the edge, capable of harm or healing. When 19th century folklorists recorded these tales, they often stripped away the subtle etymologies, but careful comparison across dialects restores some of the lost depth. Imagine standing on a hill at dawn, looking over a misty river valley. The first sunlight strikes frost-covered reeds. In the distance, a raven calls. This is the sensory world that shaped the myth, not a world of castles and courts, but of wooden shrines, ritual fires, and long paths through birch groves. In this world, the story of Baba Yaga was less about good and evil than about crossing thresholds, from village to forest, childhood to adulthood, life to death. By understanding this context, we see why Baba Yaga endures. She is not just a scary grandmother from a storybook. She is the echo of a whole ecosystem and way of life, a symbolic map of how people once navigated uncertainty. When modern readers picture her hut turning on chicken legs, they are looking at a compressed history of burial rites, initiation rituals, and female knowledge. This is the soil from which the later fairy tale sprouted, the soil we will keep exploring as we move from her environment into the origins of her myth. Long before printing presses, the name of Baba Yaga moved only on the breath of storytellers. We can't point to one first version of her myth. Instead, we find a web of oral accounts stretching across centuries. Each story is a snapshot of a performance that once flickered in a firelit room. If we listen carefully to these fragments, we hear the layers of a goddess who slowly became a witch, a mentor who became a menace, and a memory of a world where the sacred and the dangerous were never far apart. Scholars reconstruct these earliest forms from hints in medieval chronicles, from ritual songs, and from the way certain motifs appear across many villages. In some of the oldest variants, Baba Yaga is not yet called by that name. She may be the old forest mother, the Iron Woman, or simply the one who tests. These stories are shorter, less moralized, and often end abruptly, as if the storyteller assumed the audience already knew the larger context. They describe a being who grants fire, gives secret knowledge, or punishes those who disrespect the boundaries of the forest. A recurring image in these older tales is the hut on high legs, standing at a clearing's edge, its door facing away from the hero until the correct ritual words are spoken. In some versions, it stands on stilts made of bones. In others, it rotates slowly like the sun. This detail may echo solar cults or ancient burial houses lifted above the ground to keep animals away. By circling the hut 3 times sunwise or against the sun, the hero enacts a miniature cosmic journey, aligning with or defying natural order before entering. Another early motif is the gift of fire. Heroes often arrive at Baba Yaga's hut in desperate need of a spark or a glowing ember. This is not simply a household convenience. In the long northern winters, fire meant survival. Ethnographers note that even into the modern period, some Slavic villages kept communal hearths or performed rituals when lighting a new household fire. In mythic form, Baba Yaga becomes the keeper of this life-giving element, a role reminiscent of Hestia or Vesta, the hearth goddesses of Greece and Rome, or of Prometheus stealing fire for humanity. Some of the oldest songs connected to seasonal festivals mention a crone or old mother, who travels through the village during liminal times, harvest, midwinter, or the start of spring. She may demand offerings or recite blessings. These figures are not yet demonized. They act as regulators of balance, ensuring that boundaries between seasons, between the living and the dead, are properly marked. When Christianity spread through Eastern Europe, many of these customs were absorbed or rebranded. The old mother became a witch. Her blessings turned into curses. Her fire became dangerous magic. Even the flying mortar and pestle, so distinctive to Baba Yaga, may derive from ritual rather than fantasy. Mortars were used in communal feasts, in preparing herbs, and in grinding grains for sacred bread. In some initiation rites, novices carried large mortars or drums as symbols of transformation. By putting Baba Yaga inside a mortar, storytellers may have been showing her as both the wielder and the embodiment of that transformative force, grinding down the old self so something new could emerge. Regional differences reveal how flexible the myth was. In northern Russia, she may appear as a solitary figure in a dense pine forest. In the Carpathians, she sometimes has sisters, 3 Baba Yagas representing 3 stages of life: maiden, mother, crone. In Belarusian stories, she is occasionally married to a forest demon or lives near a boundary stone between worlds. These variations are not contradictions, but windows into how local communities adapted a shared archetype to their own terrain and concerns. When folklorists like Afanasiev finally wrote down the stories in the 19th century, they often cleaned up the oral versions. Dialogue was smoothed out, Christian morals inserted, and repetitive chants reduced to a single line. What survives in print is already a late stage in the myth's life cycle. Yet even in these tamed texts, hints of the older worldview persist. The ritual circling of the hut, the offering of food to animals before meeting Baba Yaga. The heroes need to show humility or cleverness rather than brute force. Modern linguistics adds another layer of evidence. The root, yag, in several Slavic languages connects not only to illness or horror, but to words meaning hunt, heat, or sacrifice. Some scholars propose that Baba Yaga once presided over a ritual hunt or over the passage of souls, a psychopomp in female form. If so, the later tales of her devouring children are not random cruelty, but a distorted echo of a function, guiding or consuming the old life before rebirth. All of this reminds us that myths are not static. They shift as societies shift. A being once honored can become feared. A ritual can become a cautionary tale. With Baba Yaga, we can watch this transformation almost in real time, because the oral tradition lasted so long that it overlaps with written history. She is like a palimpsest, a manuscript written over many times, where faint traces of the older text still show through. For the listener today, these early versions give Baba Yaga a depth often missing from modern retellings. She is not a cartoon but a living symbol of change, a guardian of thresholds, a memory of a goddess hidden inside a folk tale. As we continue, we'll meet the characters who orbit her, heroes, siblings, magical creatures, and see how each encounter reveals another facet of her power. In almost every tale about Baba Yaga, there's not just a forest and a hut but also a cast of characters who orbit her like planets around a dark sun. These figures, heroes, siblings, animal helpers, mysterious donors, are not random additions. They show how the myth functioned as a teaching tool, dramatizing values like humility, courage, and cleverness. Looking closely at them lets us see the full architecture of the stories, and the way Baba Yaga sits at its center. One of the most common protagonists is the abandoned or exiled child. In Russian and Ukrainian variants, it is often a girl, Vasilisa Maria, or an unnamed youngest daughter, sent into the woods by a cruel stepmother to fetch fire or perform an impossible task. Sometimes it is a boy, an apprentice, a soldier, a prince in disguise, driven by hunger or fate, to the crone's hut. This pattern reflects a rite of passage. The child leaves the protection of the village, faces danger, and either returns transformed or disappears. In a culture where adolescence meant early work, marriage, or war, these stories prepared listeners for the moment when they too would step beyond the known. Another recurring figure is the cruel stepmother or jealous elder sister. She stands for internal village conflict, the envy and pressure that push the hero outward. In some tales, she gives the hero a token or secret instructions, knowing the forest is a death trap. In others, she simply wants him gone. Either way, she triggers the journey. The storyteller thus creates a double threshold: social rejection inside the village, supernatural testing outside. Within the forest, the hero almost always meets animal helpers before reaching Baba Yaga's hut. Talking birds, enchanted cats, or even a humble mouse appear. The hero's treatment of them, kindness, feeding, freeing from traps, determines the outcome later. This mechanism is an ancient moral technology. It teaches listeners that small acts of respect to nature prepare you for larger trials. When the hero spares a creature or offers it crumbs, the creature later whispers how to survive Baba Yaga's tasks. Baba Yaga herself, sometimes as servants or relatives, who blur the line between human and cosmic. In certain versions, she owns a herd of white, red, and black horses that circle the sky at dawn, noon, and night, echoes of solar cycles. In others, she has 3 riders, white, red, and black, who arrive silently to mark times of day. These spectral figures suggest that Baba Yaga once commanded the rhythms of time or the seasons, another hint at her goddess origins. The hero who notices and names them correctly gains an advantage. We also see occasional appearances of otherworldly donors who precede Baba Yaga or compete with her. A forest spirit, a river king, or a talking skull might give advice on how to approach the hut. These characters act like signposts in an initiation labyrinth. They show that the journey is not purely individual but part of a larger cosmic pattern where everything, animals, rivers, seasons, cooperates if approached with respect. Inside the hut, Baba Yaga is both host and judge. She demands that the visitor complete impossible tasks. Sort a mountain of grain overnight, clean the stables, weave a shirt from nettles, fetch water from a well guarded by serpents. These tasks are symbolic, mirroring real chores of village life, but exaggerated to mythic scale. Sorting grain teaches discernment. Weaving from nettles teaches patience and endurance. Fetching water from a serpent well is a confrontation with fear. By framing chores as tests, the story elevates daily survival skills into spiritual exercises. If the hero succeeds, Baba Yaga may reward them with a magical object, a self-lighting torch, a cloth that produces food, a horse that crosses the sky, a doll that does tasks invisibly. Each gift represents empowerment, a tool to navigate the next stage of life. In older oral variants, these gifts are not loot, but symbols of maturity. Fire for independence, speed for freedom, food for self-sufficiency. If the hero fails, showing greed, rudeness, or laziness, Baba Yaga's darker side appears. She threatens to cook them, chase them with her pestle, or send her riders to erase their path. Even then, the punishment is often described obliquely. The hero vanishes, or the story simply ends. The lack of graphic detail suggests that the point is not horror, but the warning. Fail the test, and you lose your way. Looking across dozens of variants, we see that Baba Yaga's interactions create a moral grammar. The cruel stepmother triggers exile. Animal helpers test compassion. Impossible tasks test perseverance. Baba Yaga tests humility and cleverness. Gifts mark transformation. Return marks rebirth. It's a cycle embedded in narrative form. Comparative mythology shows similar cycles elsewhere. The Greek Persephone must ascend to Hades, guided by Hermes, before she becomes Queen of Spring. The Norse hero Sigurd meets a sleeping Valkyrie who teaches him runes. In Japanese folklore, a humble fisherman visits the undersea palace of Ryujin and receives a jewel controlling the tides. These stories, like those of Baba Yaga, combine peril, etiquette, and reward to teach listeners how to face the unknown. When we view Baba Yaga through this lens, she is less an antagonist than a cosmic examiner. She enforces the rules of passage from one state to another. Her animal helpers, strange riders, and magical gifts are not arbitrary, but parts of a coherent system, an ancient template for storytelling that survived into the age of fairy tales. And so, as we walk deeper into her myth, we're ready to watch her first major stories unfold. The narrative mini-films, where a hero confronts her, fails or succeeds, and returns changed. These key plots will show us how the figure evolved from sacred guardian to fearsome witch without ever losing her magnetic pull on the imagination. One of the most famous dramatic encounters with Baba Yaga comes through the figure of Vasilisa the Beautiful, a story recorded in the 19th century, but clearly older in its bones. It reads like a miniature myth of death and rebirth, a test of courage and character wrapped in fairy tale form. Vasilisa is a young girl whose mother dies early. On her deathbed, the mother gives her a small wooden doll, telling her to feed it a little bread and water whenever she needs help. Soon after, the father remarries a woman with 2 daughters of her own. In the village hierarchy, the stepmother rules the household. Vasilisa is made to work harder, ridiculed, and finally sent into the deep forest to fetch fire from Baba Yaga's hut. Everyone knows this is a death sentence, except Vasilisa, who quietly places bread before the doll and sets out. The journey through the forest is a sequence of omens. First, she sees a rider on a white horse who gallops past and disappears at dawn. Later, a red rider at noon, then a black rider at night. These are Baba Yaga servants, the cycles of day in living form. They wordlessly mark the stages of the girl's passage from safety into danger. In some versions, Vasilisa greets them. In others, she simply notes their presence, a sign of her alertness and respect. When she arrives at the hut, it turns on its chicken legs, creaking and groaning. "Hut, hut, turn your back to the forest and your face to me," she says, the ritual words known to every listener of the tale. The door swings open. Inside, the air smells of iron and herbs. Baba Yaga herself sits hunched over a mortar, eyes glowing like coals, iron teeth gleaming. She agrees to give Vasilisa fire only if the girl completes impossible tasks. Sort a bushel of grain mixed with dirt, wash and press a pile of laundry, prepare a meal. Here the story teaches its hidden lesson. Vasilisa feeds the doll a crumb of bread. Overnight the tasks are completed. Baba Yaga grumbles, but does not punish her. The tasks are not about brute strength, but about humility, ritual, and the quiet power of asking for help. The doll, representing the mother's blessing, ancestral guidance, or the inner self, bridges the gap between the girl and the crone. During her stay, Vasilisa observes Baba Yaga's habits. She asks about the mysterious riders. Baba Yaga answers briefly, "My bright day, my red sun, my black night," then changes the subject. This small exchange reveals cosmic secrets. The crone commands the passage of time. But when Vasilisa asks more questions, Baba Yaga snaps at her. In the old worldview, knowledge must be earned, not seized. Finally, satisfied or perhaps unnerved by the girl's purity, Baba Yaga gives her a glowing skull on a stick, a spark of fire, to take home. This is not a simple torch. It is a symbol of transformation, a piece of the crone's own power. In some versions, the skull's eyes burn with inner light, scanning the path ahead. When Vasilisa reaches her stepmother's house, the skull flares up, and the household perishes in the fire or flees into the night. In less violent variants, the skull simply restores light to the hearth, and the abusive family disappears from the narrative. Either way, Vasilisa is now free, protected by a power she has earned. For listeners, this story works on many levels. On the surface, it is a revenge fantasy. An oppressed child outwits her tormentors. Beneath that, it is a ritual of initiation. Vasilisa leaves the village, childhood, travels through the forest, liminality, enters the hut, womb/tomb, completes tasks, ordeal, receives fire, knowledge, and returns transformed, adulthood. Baba Yaga is not simply an antagonist, but the midwife of that transformation. Anthropologists see in this tale echoes of older practices, sending adolescents into the woods to test their survival, giving them tokens of the ancestors, teaching them to respect unseen forces. Even the glowing skull may recall actual objects, carved effigies, ancestor heads, or sacred embers carried from shrine to home. The story compresses these customs into a single night in a single hut, but the symbolism would have been obvious to early audiences. Comparing Vasilisa to other heroes across the Slavic world shows how flexible the template is. Sometimes it is a boy who must bring back a feather from a firebird, a horse from the underworld, or a cup of living water. Sometimes Baba Yaga rides after the fleeing hero, shaking her pestle to create rivers or forests that slow pursuit, a motif found also in Finnish and Baltic epics. In every case, the hero's behavior before and inside the hut determines the outcome. Respect, patience, and cleverness lead to survival. Arrogance or cruelty leads to disappearance. Modern readers might focus on the stepmother's destruction or the fiery skull as punishment, but older tellings emphasize the gift of fire, the hero's growth, and the idea that even the most fearsome guardian can bestow blessings if approached in the right way. In this sense, the story preserves a glimpse of Baba Yaga's divine side, keeper of time, mistress of fire, teacher through ordeal. This first mini-film in her mythic cycle shows us how a single narrative can carry multiple layers: social warning, psychological rite of passage, and echo of a forgotten goddess. In the next major storyline, Baba Yaga appears again but in a different role, less a tester of orphans, more a cosmic obstacle or helper in a hero's quest. Watching her shift between these roles lets us see the full spectrum of her mythic identity. If Vasilisa's story shows Baba Yaga as a severe but ultimately fair initiator, another great cluster of tales reveals her more ambiguous face, sometimes obstacle, sometimes helper, sometimes both at once. In these versions, the hero is not a helpless child but a questing adult, a soldier, a prince in exile, or a hunter searching for a magical object. The forest is still the testing ground, but the stakes are higher. Kingdoms, marriages, and cosmic balances hang in the balance. One of the most striking examples is the cycle of stories, where a hero seeks the water of life, or the firebird's feather. In one Russian variant, a Tsar's youngest son must bring back living water to heal his father. He travels across 3 kingdoms, passing through iron, silver, and golden forests. Each time he is warned of Baba Yaga's hut and the riders who guard it. When he reaches her, she demands tasks as before, but now the tasks echo cosmic themes. Find the key to a mountain of glass, capture a horse that runs faster than the wind, fetch a drop of dew from a sleeping dragon. Unlike Vasilisa, this hero cannot rely on a doll or a mother's blessing. He must build alliances with animals, spirits, and sometimes with Baba Yaga herself. In certain versions, she lends him her horse or gives him a thread that leads to the underworld. In others, she tries to devour him, but is tricked or bound by a magic bridle. These contradictions show that Baba Yaga is not locked into one moral position. She is a threshold, and how she behaves reflects how the seeker behaves. A telling detail appears in the version where she offers the hero a bath and a meal before setting tasks. Bathing, eating, and sleeping in a stranger's house are classic markers of initiation and hospitality. They blur the line between guest and captive. If the hero accepts food with greed or falls asleep without caution, Baba Yaga's servants overpower him. If he shows restraint and gratitude, she becomes an ally. The hut itself is both trap and sanctuary, echoing the double nature of initiation lodges in traditional societies. Regional differences highlight this ambiguity even more. In Polish tales, the forest which may raise winds to blow a hero off course, but later point out the road to a magical apple tree. In Lithuanian variants, she is a widow who guards a gate between worlds, offering riddles instead of chores. In Carpathian stories, she can take the form of a bird, leading the hero through mountain passes. Each local retelling retains the core motif, a powerful female guardian at a liminal space, but shifts the moral color depending on what lesson the community wants to teach. Even her pursuit scenes carry ritual echoes. When the hero escapes with a magical object, Baba Yaga chases in her mortar, striking the earth with her pestle to create rivers, forests, or mountains that slow him down. This throwing behind of obstacles mirrors a well-known folk magic technique, dropping combs, towels, or salt to create barriers against pursuers. In mythic form, Baba Yaga herself performs the cosmic version of this magic, reshaping the landscape as she moves. Some scholars see these episodes as memories of shamanic journeys. The hero travels to the edge of death or the underworld, meets a terrifying guide, receives a boon, and returns. Baba Yaga can be both the guide and the guardian of the treasure. Her shifting role mirrors the unpredictability of the spirit world, where help and harm come from the same source. For a pre-modern audience, this was not inconsistency but realism. Power is always double-edged. Another revealing strand involves 3 Baba Yagas living at the corners of the world. The hero must visit each one in turn, collecting information or gifts. This triadic pattern matches the 3 riders, the 3 stages of life, and the 3 thresholds: village, forest, otherworld. It also echoes Indo-European goddess triads like the Greek Moirai or the Celtic Morrigan. In these stories, the hero's success depends on treating each Baba Yaga with respect, recognizing her as part of a larger whole rather than an isolated monster. When read together, these adult quest tales show Baba Yaga as a cosmic force whose attitude reflects the hero's conduct. She can be death, wisdom, or both. She can bar the way or lend her fastest steed. She can test humility or punish arrogance. She embodies what anthropologists call a liminal persona, a being who rules thresholds and whose job is to destabilize so that transformation can occur. For a modern listener, these versions complicate the simplistic image of a witch in a hut. They reveal a dynamic, situational figure who can be mentor, enemy, or trickster, depending on context. They also hint at the deeper mythic strata beneath the fairy tales, a once revered goddess of cycles, now fragmented into contradictory roles. By watching how she behaves in different narratives, we learn not only about Slavic folklore, but about the human psyche's way of dealing with uncertainty and change. We have now seen Baba Yaga both as initiator of children and as tester or helper of adult heroes. In the next movement of our exploration, we'll step back from plot to symbolism, looking at the animals, numbers, colors, and objects that orbit her, the visual language through which the myth speaks to us even before we grasp the words. If the episodes of Baba Yaga's tales are the sentences of a long story, then her symbols are its vocabulary, the images, colors, and numbers that transmit meaning even before a single line is spoken. In older oral cultures, these motifs were like a code everyone could read. They linked the supernatural to the everyday and signaled to listeners what kind of power or danger was approaching. The hut on chicken legs. Perhaps the most famous symbol is the hut itself. Its chicken legs puzzle modern readers, but archaeologists point to raised mortuary houses built on posts carved to resemble bird feet. In some Slavic dialects, the word for chicken overlaps with bone or leg. A hut lifted from the ground is both practical, keeping out animals, and damp, and sacred, marking a space between worlds. When a hero circles it 3 times sunwise or counter-sunwise, they are performing a micro-ritual of orientation, like turning a key in a cosmic lock. Only when they say the right phrase does the door open, a lesson in humility and respect for hidden knowledge. Numbers and cycles. 3 riders, 3 tasks, 3 Baba Yagas. The number 3 saturates these stories. It marks completeness. Dawn, noon, night, birth, life, death, past, present, future. To an audience steeped in oral tradition, 3 was not arbitrary but a signpost. Even the tasks often run in 3s. Sort grain, clean stables, fetch water. Each completed task is a rung on the ladder of transformation. Sometimes the stories use the number 9. 9 mountains, 9 days, 9 rivers, especially in Southern Slavic versions. 9 often signals a deeper journey, a full cycle of gestation or rebirth. Crossing 9 rivers to reach Baba Yaga's hut hints that the hero is symbolically dying to the old self. Colors and horses. White, red, and black appear again and again. The riders or horses in these colors mark time and polarity. White for dawn and new beginnings, red for noon and life's heat, black for night and mystery. The hero who recognizes their meaning shows readiness for initiation. These colors also echo older cosmologies. White, the world of the living; red, the liminal threshold of blood and fire; black, the realm of ancestors. Baba Yaga commands them all. Animals. Beyond her spectral horses, Baba Yaga's world teems with creatures. Cats, birds, mice, and wolves often act as intermediaries. In Slavic village life, these animals had practical and symbolic value. Cats for protection of grain, birds as omens, mice as invisible household spirits, wolves as both danger and guide. A hero's behavior toward these animals signals their moral state. In myths where Baba Yaga has a pet cat or a talking bird, kindness to the creature often unlocks survival tips or magical assistance. Objects of power. The items Baba Yaga gives or withholds are never random. A glowing skull on a stick brings fire, and perhaps the wisdom of the ancestors. A flying mortar and pestle, though strange to modern ears, symbolize transformation, grinding down the old into something new. Magic combs, towels, or loaves left behind by the fleeing hero expand into forests, rivers, or mountains to block pursuit. Everyday objects turned into cosmic tools. These motifs reflect the reality of peasant life, where comb or towel was a valued possession, and where small actions could shift a household's fate. Smells, sounds, directions. Many oral versions describe sensory details. The smell of iron, the creak of the hut, the hiss of the pestle, the forest standing in silence. To a preliterate audience, these cues were like stage directions. Iron smelled of blacksmithing and war. Creaking would signal something alive. Even the direction a hero travels, east for birth, west for death, carries meaning. Entering Baba Yaga's domain is not just a walk in the woods, but a crossing of cosmic coordinates. By decoding these symbols, we see that Baba Yaga stories are not a random collection of spooky images. They form a ritual landscape where each color, number, and object signals a stage of the journey. For a listener in an ancient village, this code was as clear as traffic signs are to us. For a modern viewer, it may feel like a dream, but by learning the language, we can read the myth's deeper messages. These symbols also explain Baba Yaga's persistence in contemporary imagination. Artists, writers, and game designers borrow the hut on chicken legs, the three riders, the glowing skull, because these images already hum with archetypal power. Even without context, they feel potent and strange, hinting at a larger story. Having explored the symbolic language, we can now turn to the present. The surprising ways Baba Yaga has left fingerprints on our language, festivals, and pop culture. From folklore scholarship to blockbuster movies, she continues to shift shape and find new audiences, carrying her forest of symbols into the modern world. Step out of the ancient forest and into the modern world, and you will still find Baba Yaga waiting. She hides in plain sight, in the language of everyday idioms, in children's rhymes, in seasonal festivals, in literature and film. Her hut may no longer creak on chicken legs, but its outline shows up in stage sets, Halloween decorations, and digital game environments. The legend has drifted far from its original ritual soil, yet its roots still reach into our cultural subconscious. In language and proverbs, across Eastern Europe, traces of Baba Yaga appear in sayings and nicknames. A scolding grandmother might jokingly be called a Baba Yaga. In some dialects, Yaga still carries undertones of illness or spite. Children chant rhymes about a forest grandmother, who will snatch them if they don't behave. These phrases act like cultural fossils. Even when people no longer believe in the witch, they use her name to mark boundaries of behavior, of safety, of the wild beyond home. In seasonal rituals, scholars note that certain rural festivals preserve elements of her myth. Effigies of an old woman are burned or carried to the edge of the village at spring equinox, symbolizing the passing of winter. Girls in some regions still perform circling dances around a bonfire or a decorated pole, echoing the ritual circling of Baba Yaga's hut. In these contexts, the crone is not evil but necessary, a personification of winter, age, and the old year that must be honored before it departs. In literature, writers of the 19th and 20th centuries quickly realized Baba Yaga's narrative power. Alexander Pushkin alludes to her in his fairy tale poems. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov's opera, Kashchi the Immortal, includes a Baba Yaga-like figure as part of its dark landscape. In the 20th century, children's books softened her edges, turning her into a quirky witch with a magical house. At the same time, poets and novelists reclaimed her darker aspects as symbols of female power, outsider status, or ecological wisdom. In art and illustration, illustrators such as Ivan Bilibin defined the classic image of Baba Yaga's hut for generations: spindly chicken legs, curling smoke, dark forest backdrop. These images spread beyond Russia into European and American children's books, carrying with them the mood of deep woods and moral tests. Contemporary artists reinterpret her as a forest guardian, an eco-feminist icon, or a cyberpunk which dwelling in a hut of data streams. The archetype adapts, keeping its bones while changing its skin. In film and animation, cinematic versions range from the eerie to the playful. Soviet-era cartoons made her a stock villain with a crooked nose and a high laugh. Western fantasy films borrow her hut, her skull torches, and her magical tasks. Even in unexpected genres she appears, in action movies as a code name for unstoppable killers, in indie animations as a trickster mentor. These pop-culture Baba Yagas rarely match the complex original, but the name alone signals mystery, danger, and old power. In video games and comics, game designers love Baba Yaga's imagery because it comes preloaded with interactive tropes: a moving hut as a dungeon, tasks to complete for a magical reward, a terrifying boss who might become an ally. From role-playing games to open-world adventures, she appears as a quest giver, an end boss, or a hidden secret. Comics, too, have recast her as everything from a cosmic librarian to a time-traveling witch. Each version keeps the key symbols: the hut, the riders, the skull, the mortar, because they immediately convey threshold magic. Why she survives. All of these echoes show how myths behave in the modern era. They shed specifics and keep archetypes. Baba Yaga survives because she embodies a universal pattern, the dangerous teacher at the edge of the known. In a world of skyscrapers instead of forests, we still need stories about crossing boundaries, facing fear, and finding unexpected wisdom. Her chicken-legged hut may now sit on a movie set or a game server, but its door still turns only for those who know the right words. At the same time, scholars and artists are beginning to recover her older layers, the goddess of cycles hidden inside the witch. Folklore conferences host panels on her Indo-European parallels. Feminist writers reclaim her as a symbol of age and autonomy rather than monstrosity. Ecological thinkers see her as a reminder that the wild, though dangerous, is also necessary. So when a child on a playground sings a rhyme about Baba Yaga, or when a gamer steps into a digital hut for a quest, they are taking part in a chain of storytelling thousands of years long. The forest may be virtual now, but the journey, exile, ordeal, return, remains the same. With her footprints traced from ancient shrines to pop culture, we're ready to step back and look at the tension between myth and history. What can anthropology, archaeology, and psychology tell us about why a figure like Baba Yaga persists? And how do we responsibly distinguish between legend and fact without draining away the legend's meaning? To understand why Baba Yaga has endured, we need to shift from the forest of stories into the field of research. Anthropologists, archaeologists, and psychologists have all tried to map the terrain of her myth. Their findings don't solve her mystery so much as reveal why such a figure keeps returning, reshaping itself for new eras. Anthropology and the threshold. Anthropologists see Baba Yaga as a classic liminal persona. In many traditional societies, liminal beings guard the space between states, between childhood and adulthood, village and wilderness, life and death. They frighten but also instruct. Baba Yaga fits this pattern perfectly. Her hut is literally a boundary, raised above the earth, turning on its legs, facing away until invited. Entering it is a symbolic passage out of the everyday world. Completing her tasks marks reintegration. In this sense, she functions much like the masked figures of initiation ceremonies in Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, guardians who test and teach before welcoming initiates back as new persons. Archaeology and sacred houses. Archaeologists link her imagery to physical structures. Across northern Eurasia, especially among Finno-Ugric peoples, Small elevated houses stored sacred objects or the remains of the dead. Posts carved as animal legs or bird feet are well documented. Circling such structures sunwise or counter-sunwise was part of funerary or seasonal rites. When oral tales describe a hero circling the hut 3 times before entering, they may be echoing an actual ritual. Over centuries, the ritual context faded but the image stayed, eventually morphing into a witch's hut on chicken legs. Mythology and the triple goddess. Comparative mythologists note that Baba Yaga shares traits with other Indo-European triple goddesses, the Greek Moirai, the Norse Norns, the Celtic Morrigan. Her 3 riders and 3 selves reflect a cycle of maiden, mother, and crone, dawn, noon, and night, birth, life, and death. Such figures once governed time, fate, or seasons. In this reading, Baba Yaga is a surviving sliver of an older goddess who ruled transitions. When patriarchal or monotheistic systems rose, these deities were often reduced to witches or demons. The myth didn't vanish, it changed costumes. Psychology and the shadow mentor. Depth psychology offers another lens. Carl Jung proposed that myths externalize archetypes of the human psyche. Baba Yaga resembles what he called the shadow, or the wise old woman, a force of intuition, danger, and hidden knowledge. She devours the ego but also offers rebirth. In this sense, a child hearing about Baba Yaga is rehearsing an internal drama, facing fear, integrating instincts, emerging stronger. The doll Vasilisa carries is like a symbol of the self, guiding the ego through transformation. Why she feels real? Because Baba Yaga draws from ritual, environment, and psyche at once. She feels more than fictional. Her hut is a mortuary house, a womb, and a riddle. Her mortar and pestle are kitchen tools and instruments of alchemy. Her tasks are chores and initiations. This layering makes her believable even in fantasy form. Each element has a foot in daily life and a foot in the symbolic, separating legend from fact. Responsible scholarship avoids claiming Baba Yaga was literally worshipped as a goddess or that every detail has a single origin. We have no temples to Baba Yaga, no inscriptions naming her as a deity. What we have are patterns, parallels, echoes, and transformations. Saying, according to legend, or some scholars suggest, is not hedging but respecting the evidence. Myths are cultural memory encoded as narrative, not historical records. Why she endures? By combining environmental memory, forests, winters, raised huts, social functions, initiation, moral teaching, and psychological archetypes, the shadow mentor. Baba Yaga covers 3 major layers of human experience. That's why she can migrate from oral story to printed fairy tale to modern pop culture without losing her charge. She is not a fixed character but a flexible pattern, a living algorithm of transformation. Understanding this doesn't drain her mystery, it deepens it. Knowing that the hut on chicken legs may come from mortuary houses, or that the 3 riders mirror cosmic cycles, makes the stories richer. It shows how much meaning an old tale can carry without any central author, how community after community added its brushstroke until a complex portrait emerged. We've traced Baba Yaga from deep prehistory through symbols and science. What remains is to step back once more and ask, why does she still matter now? What can a 21st century audience, far from the birch forests of her origin, learn from this goddess in exile? In the end, Baba Yaga's long journey, from prehistoric shrines to bedtime stories, from whispered charms to streaming platforms, is less about one witch than about a human need. We invent guardians at thresholds because thresholds never go away. Children still leave home. People still cross into unknowns, new schools, new cities, new relationships, new selves. Even in a world of satellites and smartphones, the experience of stepping beyond the familiar feels like entering a deep forest at dusk. When we retell her myths today, we are also rehearsing our own courage. The hut on chicken legs becomes a symbol for any door we're afraid to open. The tasks, sorting the impossible, enduring hardship, listening to subtle helpers, mirror the skills we need in real life. Discernment, patience, kindness. The glowing skull on a stick is not just a torch, but a spark of insight we carry back from the ordeal. Baba Yaga tests, but also equips. She is the drama of transformation disguised as a frightening old woman. Seeing her as a goddess in exile reframes the legend. Instead of a villain lurking in the woods, she becomes an elder presence who once held a sacred role, later miscast as monstrous. Recognizing this allows modern audiences to reclaim something valuable, a model of feminine power not based on youth or beauty, but on age, knowledge, and independence. It also reminds us that the wild, the uncharted, the inconvenient, the risky, is not just an enemy, but a teacher. Her continued life in language, festivals, and pop culture shows that myths do not simply die when their rituals fade. They migrate, adapt, and find new ways to tell us the same truths. Baba Yaga has become a code name, a comic book character, a video game quest giver, a meme. Each version is a new mask, but behind the mask remains the pattern. The liminal figure who frightens and instructs, who stands at the edge and holds out a test. Approached with respect, she offers gifts. Approached with arrogance, she devours. This is not superstition, but a narrative way of teaching how power works in the world. Even in business or science we speak of gatekeepers, trials, rites of passage. Baba Yaga is their ancestor. She embodies the truth that every significant crossing demands both humility and courage. For the listener of a 21st century documentary, this may be the most enduring lesson. You don't need to believe in a literal hut or a literal crone to feel the pull of the story. Each time you take on a daunting project, confront a fear, or walk into an unfamiliar environment, you enact the Baba Yaga myth. You step off the safe path, meet a challenge, and if you listen, observe, and persevere, return changed, carrying your own version of the glowing skull. In this way, the legend is not only a window into the past, but a mirror for the present. It invites us to honor age and knowledge, to treat the wild with respect, to see tests as invitations to grow. It shows that even in exile a goddess can still speak, disguised as a fairy tale witch, whispering to anyone willing to enter the forest. And so the door of the hut turns toward you. Smoke rises from the chimney. The air smells of iron and pine. Inside, the old woman stirs her cauldron and waits. Her eyes glint with something more than malice. They hold a question. Will you approach with fear, or with readiness to learn? The answer determines not just the story you're about to hear, but the person you're about to become.